A few days ago, we all watched the version 4.0 livestream and we were left speechless by the gorgeous sights of Fontaine and by the incredible work of the developers to make this nation truly unique. So here we are, with a very long video ahead of us to analyze in detail every single frame and every statement we heard in the livestream. As always, this is a theory video. I use information available in the game and in this case in the livestream and official teasers, but my conclusions and guesses are not to be considered the official lore of the game, unless I got something right and it's confirmed in a later update of the game itself. This video will have multiple chapters, as you can see on the timeline. Each chapter will deal with a single topic, and I hope I organized the video in an easy and understandable way. So put your diving suit on, because this is gonna be a very long swim. The first and probably the most important section of this video is gonna be the analysis of the official trailer. I will mention various names of places here, but I will explain them in the second chapter of this video, which will be entirely on the geography of Fontaine. The trailer begins with the Hydro Archon sitting on a throne in the middle of the water with runes in the background, almost as if they were sinking. Now, I can't really say for sure, but the fact that the runes behind the throne look a lot like the bridges we saw underwater in the first teaser trailer makes me think that the Archon on the throne may not be Furina, but the original Hydro Archon. The narrator talks about a prophecy, according to which the people will be dissolved into the waters except for the Archon, who will cry on her throne, just like we're shown, and this is also mentioned in the description of the trailer. Why cry for no reason? We've read a prophecy about Fontaine in Renée's investigation notes, but it was different because it involved some kind of inevitable impact. But it is certainly worrying that the people are going to be dissolved into the waters. The scene changes and we see Fossolor welcoming us, sitting on a wall in Romaratime harbor. Below her we see Chlorinde with, I guess, some soldiers, and farther away we see Eder and Paimon accompanied by Lini and Lynette. We are also shown the incredible waterfalls that surround the entirety of the nation and the aquarial we will use to get to the core of Fontaine. We also see an airship flying around, and I hope we'll be able to board one of those. Next scene, we are on the aquarial at the entrance to the core of Fontaine, the most important city of the nation. We are shown the city from above, but we'll talk about it in detail in the next chapter. While Navia is asking us if we think it's right that trials are treated like an opera, we are shown this huge device in the middle of the city, which reminds me of both the core of the Velurium Mirage and an astrolabe. Then we are shown the building behind it and we see a big clock that seems to be stuck at 3:45. We then see Navia and her two minions. She does feel like a mafia boss at this point, but we'll talk about her in the chapter dedicated to the characters. Next, we're shown a building with a bird insignia. The name above the door is L'Oiseau de Vapeur, which simply means the steambird. This is the worldwide famous Fontainian newspaper on which Mona publishes her astrology articles. We then see a bulletin board, but as we saw later in the trailer, it's located outside the courtroom. Among the people, we see both Navia and Lini for a split second, and Lini, which is the narrator, tells us that in Fontaine, trials are not so different than performances. Then we see the courtroom, the Opéra Épiclès, and Lini and Lynette's introduction. Since I won't talk about the characters' abilities, let's check the background. Lini's introduction takes place on the field beneath the core of Fontaine, which is the main city again. He is fighting close to a particular gazebo we will see later in the trailer. On the left of the gazebo we can see a tower in the distance. We will see many of these towers throughout the whole livestream, and they are most likely repeaters, but we're gonna talk about them in another chapter of this video. We can also see some strange rock formations that honestly look like rib bones of a gigantic monster, just like the remains of Durin on Dragonspine. Considering that later in the livestream we saw a section of the map and we can see other formations that look like bones, I would guess that there was indeed a gigantic monster that died here. At the end of Lini and Lynette's introduction, we see a room filled with props, books, and gears. I don't really know what it is, but it may have something to do with the two performers. Next, we are shown different areas of Fontaine. The first one is the courtyard, characterized by sunflowers. Then we see an easel and canvas in the field where Lini and Lynette were fighting before, which reminds me of Julian from the Sumeru World Quest and Artist Adrift. And then we see again the gazebo from before, only this time there's fruit in the casket on the table underneath it, and there's also a card on the side. Next, we're shown one of the new bosses, the Emperor of Fire and Iron, then we see Merusel village, and then something like a church where Freminet is introduced. While he's fighting, we are on a beach on the right of the core of Fontaine, and we see a barrel in the sea, which could be the Fontaine version of the floating chests in Inazuma, Sumeru and sometime in Liyue. There is also something definitely strange underneath the tree, but it's too blurry to understand what it is, and then we see something that looks like a crashed ship on land. Then we see the old city of Fontaine, now completely submerged, and Freminet talks about fossils of once beautiful creatures. I think this may be one of the fossils that Freminet is talking about, because that is definitely a mouth with teeth. Freminet's introduction ends with him wondering when the rest of the world will be submerged as well. We do know that the water in Fontaine rises and causes floods, but I don't know why he would think that the entirety of the vat would end up being submerged. As of now, we have far too little on this to even attempt at coming up with a theory. We then see the throne again, but this time the Archon is not sitting on it anymore. We dive underwater and we see the body of what looks like a special Oceanid who's looking at Either, but doesn't remember who she is. Again, I still think this could be the original Hydro Archon, and we will meet her consciousness during the Archon Quest, since we do know that it is slumbering in the Harvest Stockholm, the big tree that Ruka Devata created in the Girl of the Sands to anchor the Hydro Archon's consciousness to the mortal realm. Change of scene and we see the Icewind Suite, the Dirge of Coppelia and the Nemesis of Coppelius, which is another war boss. The narrator of the scene, Lynette, says that the water is swallowing their memories and soon it will swallow them, and she jumps into a box full of water on the stage of the Opéra Épiclèse. If you look very closely, you will see that during the performance, in the first row there's the Traveler, Paimon and also Neuvillette. Lini then says that they're trying to find out how the Oratrice operates, why it has a consciousness and why it can deliver accurate sentences. The Oratrice's full name is Oratrice Mécanique d'Analyse Cardinale, which means female mechanical orator of essential analysis, and it seems to be a whole mechanism that ends with the scale in the Opéra Épiclèse. Since the Oratrice is a very complicated topic, it has a dedicated chapter in this video. Next, we're in the core of Fontaine and we see another big clock, the one on the biggest building in the city, that is clearly stuck at 3:45, just like the one in the central plaza from before. The most important thing in this scene is that it is raining, just like Navia states. If you've never noticed before, when you're inside a city, it never rains, so this is gonna be the first time it happens. Back to Lini, he says he's trying to learn the secrets of Fontaine to deal with the prophesized crisis, which gives us a deeper understanding of the three siblings' mission in Fontaine. Anyway, as the performance goes on, we see Lynette being engulfed by bright elemental power and she simply disappears, leaving just her clothes behind. And right after the box falls to the ground, Neuvillette announces that charges have been pressed and as a consequence a trial is in order. He tells, most likely us, that it would be wise to tell him everything we know, and we see Chlorinde approaching with a whole army of Gardamex, as we're fighting them together with Navia and her minions. Although later we will see that Chlorinde is also fighting against the Gardamex, she's not leading them. Purina says that this is indeed the finale, and as the fighting scene plays, we hear an unknown voice of a man reprimanding someone about the justice and drama system in Fontaine that literally ignores the suffering of the people. Navia's voice follows and she also reprimands someone about how the laws seem to be more important than human lives. Lastly, we see Child that, for some reason, appears in the courtroom mocking the justice system in front of Neuvillette. He starts fighting the mecha present on the scene, and with this, the trailer ends. Now that we're done with the trailer, I think we deserve something lighter to digest, so let's talk about the geography of Fontaine. We learned that Romaritime Harbor is basically north of the Verukasha Oasis, and the new waypoint will spawn here, in Galeson Hill. Romaritime Harbor is basically the port that deals with the rest of the vat since it's at sea level. There we will find an elevator that will take us up the 300 meters waterfall because the entirety of the nation of Fontaine lies on an extremely but also unnaturally elevated plate. If you know me, you know that I'll try and climb the waterfall. Anyway, from Romaritime Harbor we will have to take the Clementine Aquarail that will take us to the main station of the most important city of the nation, called the Core of Fontaine. As we can see, we can just call the Aquabus and it will appear. The Clementine Aquabus seems to be conducted by the Melusine called Evil. Her name comes from Evil, the guardian spirit of either the Dalgash clan or the O'Brien clan in Irish mythology. She was a she, a race of Irish fairies, specifically a banshee, a kind of fairy that screams or shrieks to announce that someone from a specific family is about to die. Now back to the scenery, there are two interesting details. As we're traveling on the Aquabus, we see another airship parked on one of the mountainous islands, so I do think and hope we'll be able to board one of them. And on the far right, we see a very tall tower, which is never talked about nor shown again in the livestream, so my curiosity is peaking. The Core of Fontaine is a circular city built on 3 upper levels and at least 1 underground level. The upper district is the elegant residential district where most of the people live, and it's filled with shops of every kind, while the lower district, the sewers called Fleuve Centre, is characterized by poverty and disorder. By the way, we got a better look at the insignia in the sewers that we barely saw in the first teaser, which is an anchor adorned with thorny roses, and it reminds me of Navia and her association, but like I said before, we're gonna talk about her later. We also see a restaurant right underneath, and the insignia says L'Or Noir, it seems, which means the black gold. Lastly, on the top right of the screen, there's this big door with a very peculiar symbol I haven't seen anywhere else, so it's very interesting. Back to the upper district, we see that in the lower level there's the main plaza with the fountain with the strange device that we saw in the trailer. On this level we're also going to find a shop, as we saw in this specific scene. From the lower level, we will be able to dive into the lake that surrounds the city, and the area is called Salacia Plain, from the Roman goddess of the depths of the ocean and of salt water, Salacia, who was also Neptune's wife, the god of fresh water and the sea. On the lower level we will also find this cafe, and as the insignia says, it's called Café Lutèce, which incidentally is the ancient Gallic name of Paris. The middle level, that seems to be called Quartier Lyonnais, hosts a lot of shops and buildings of every kind, like the Steambird that we saw before, this shop with a scale insignia called Carita, probably from Marie Jean-Antoine Nicolas de Carita, a mathematician, philosopher and economist, but also a revolutionary politician during the French Revolution, the clothing shop called Couture, which means something like tailored fashion, and Le Show, the clockwork shop that sells clockwork mechanisms like toy birds, puppets and so on. There we will meet 2 employees who like to joke around, and they'll explain to us that Livre, the owner of the shop, is trying to make Champion Duelist themed toys to make a fortune. The name of the shop comes from Georges Auguste Le Show, a watchmaker mechanic and inventor from the 19th century. Lastly, on the upper level, there seems to be just an unknown giant building, the same one from Navia's scene about rain, with one of those big clocks on the front and a statue of the Seven. It's very interesting to see that the Archon is represented with a long flowing dress in an elegant dancing pose very similar to that of a ballerina doll inside the carillon. The entire Core of Fontaine is surrounded by a circular tall wall that was erected to prevent another flood from destroying the city. These floods seem to be a recurrent event, and the city ended up being submerged and rebuilt multiple times in the past. For example, the underwater city we saw both in the first teaser trailer and in the livestream is the original Core of Fontaine that was flooded in the past. One of these floods is called the Great Flood, which makes me think it could have happened 500 years ago, when the original Hydra Archon died, but I'm speculating. If we look at the Core of Fontaine from above again, we see 2 more aquarail lines that cut the city transversely. The aquarail on the right is the Navia line, yes, exactly like the new Geo character from before, and the aquabus is conducted by the Melusine Elfan. The name comes from lowland Scotland and northern England folklore, but also from the Scottish witch trials in the 1500s. Queen Elfam, or Elfan, is in ballads an elven queen of the fairy of the realm of Elfland, and she taught the art of healing and medicinal herbs. But in the witch trials, she was described as either the devil itself, or as a witch that ruled over witchcraft who rode on a white horse alongside the devil. Back to Fontaine, the Navia line takes us to Erigny, basically the entertainment district or area of Fontaine. Erigny is another mountainous island right at the core of Fontaine, and here we find the courtroom, called the Opéra Épiclèse. As per the translation, there are two options. Originally, so in ancient Greece, the Epiclesis was a surname given to a god, like Zeus being called Dictaeus. While in Christianity, it's the request to God to send the Holy Spirit to bring about the unity of the believers with God. I think the second one may be the right one, considering how justice in Fontaine is about faith, as we will see in the chapter dedicated to the Oratrice. So I'd say that the translation would be the Opera of the Summoning or the Summoning Opera. In this area, not too far from the Opéra Épiclèse, we will also find the new boss Icewind Suite. It's composed of two mechanical dancers that were originally created for fine arts purposes, but when the mechanic Maillard took over the project, he turned them into combat mecha. Interestingly, the name of the area comes from the Erinyes, the three sister deities of vengeance in ancient Greek mythology, known for punishing specifically those who committed crimes against family members and guests. They literally hounded and tormented the criminals to their death. I'd say that it's very interesting both that the Opéra Épiclèse is in this area and that Eula is one of the main characters of the Secret Summer Paradise event. You know, vengeance will be mine.
Not even close.
Back to the sub-area, I think that the Hotel de Bourg is going to be here as well, since the owner likes to invite artists to perform in his restaurant. By the way, the insignia simply says de Bourg. Now back to the core of Fontaine. Earlier I said that there were two aquarail lines, but we really only see the Navia line. The other one is this one, and it's pretty much destroyed from the beginning. This was the Calais line and was used to reach the Fontaine Institute of Kinetic Energy Engineering, which seems to be this huge tower to the left of the core of Fontaine. The Research Institute of Fontaine is an institution that studies machines and energy solutions, and most of the inventions we will see in Fontaine were created there. We learned a few updates ago that the institute and the clockwork system were created by Alain Guillotin not too long after the Cataclysm, since he appears in René's investigation notes from 500 years ago that we found in the Girl of the Sands. These notes were written, as the name says, by René, a young researcher that, with another very young researcher called Jacob and an unknown person called Mr. Carl, went to the Vorukash Oasis and to the Kanrian workshop nearby to look for something he eventually found, because the notes end with René making his way back to Fontaine, bringing within something for Alain to stop the impending and inevitable disaster that loomed over their nation. Interestingly, the name Guillotin is a clear reference to Joseph Ignace Guillotin, a French physician who, in 1789, proposed the use of some kind of device for the executions because the current methods were rather barbaric and excruciating. He basically told the assembly to find a way to make the executions quick and painless. The thing is that he was against the death penalty, so despite the name, he never invented the guillotine, which was actually invented by Tobias Schmidt, but because of his suggestion, the device was given his name anyway. The fact that the founder of the Research Institute of Fontaine was given Guillotin's name may be hinting at the fact that there may be an invention from the Research Institute that is currently being used in a different way than what Alain intended it for, or that it was attributed to Alain despite him not having anything to do with it. Now, we learned in version 3.5 during the event Vibrocrystal Reharmonization that the Research Institute was recently destroyed by senior technician Edwin Eastinghouse, as he was conducting an experiment using a material called Archium to deal with the waterline crisis of Fontaine. The name Eastinghouse comes from a nickname that Finnish engineers at the Loviisa nuclear power plant used when remodeling the reactors in the 1970s, so it kinda hints at what kind of disaster may have happened at the institute because of him, although at the actual Loviisa nuclear power plant nothing ever happened. Anyway, Eastinghouse is supposedly dead, considering the damage to the institute, the fact that even the aquarail line was completely destroyed, and Anatole, the NPC from the event, even almost told us that they haven't found all the pieces of the senior technician yet. The institute is now being rebuilt, but Augustus Lovelace, from the recent WordQuest Recollection of a Fontainian, told us the two people, Raimondo and Mr. Choiseul, took over the reconstruction project, but the spirit of research is now almost lost. Now, during the live stream, we were also shown other places in Fontaine. Behind Erigny, on the left, we see these huge floating cubes of water. Around them we see some kind of broken rails floating in the sky, which remind me of the dream of the three brothers, Ferdinand, Geroni and Haddo, from the Valurian Mirage, which was creating a railway system somewhere in the world. Anyway, we will be able to get into those cubes to find treasure, but we'll also use them as shortcuts of some sort. In these scenes, we saw a lot of old broken buildings on the ground below, one of which has a statue of the Seven on top, while another one has a device with a ray of light coming from it. We also saw this bubble, which is something we already know from the Varuna contraption in Sumeru. We then also saw a small village with cute little houses below an aquarelle line and a lot of these tower buildings that we're gonna talk about later. Next, one of the sub-areas of Fontaine is called Poisson, which means fish, and it's an historical underground place built from a great ship. Poisson is on a mountainous island called West Slopes of Mont Automniki. Don't ask me what Automniki means, I couldn't find anything about it, but let me give you a word of advice. If you don't want leaks, you might want to avoid googling it. Anyway, the island on the left is called either Elina or Elenas, and there we will find the Melusi village, which is where the Melusine come from. A mysterious village where chimneys bubble, but also two more strangely named areas, a lonely place and a very warm place. As I've said in my previous Fontaine video, link in the cards and description, Elenas was in European folklore Melusine's father. He was the king of Albany, which by the way is Scotland, who fell in love and married the fae Presine. She accepted to marry him, but she had him promise never to enter her chamber when she gave birth or when she was bathing her future children. They had 3 twin daughters, Melusine, Melior and Palatine, but Elenas didn't keep his promise and entered the room. Presine, furious, took her daughters and went back to the lost Isle of Avalon, from which she came from. On the twins' 15th birthday, Melusine found out why they had to leave and grow up without a father, and out of revenge, the 3 sisters captured their father and locked him in a mountain. Enraged, Presine punished her daughters, condemning them to take the form of a serpent from the waist down every Saturday. Now back to Fontaine, these 2 islands, from what we can see from the map we've been shown in the livestream, may be the first 2 islands we will pass by on the Clementine Aquarelle line on our way from Romaritime Harbor to the core of Fontaine, and the area seems to be called Beryl Region, where beryl is a class of minerals among which the most known are emeralds and aquamarine. Honestly, the first thing that came to my mind was Queen Beryl from Sailor Moon though. Other areas are going to be the underwater city, a place of melancholy, beauty and tears, and the courtyard, which is characterized by sunflowers. The developers said that they took inspiration from 18th century paintings, and sunflowers were indeed a very common artistic subject. When it comes to domains, they are going to be filled with clockwork puzzles and mechanisms, and we will find them even underwater as we saw here. 2 small details I noticed in the livestream are these hydro rings on land that seem to be a new mobility system, and these golden devices that seem to be a new kind of puzzle. We saw a few new symbols on the map, like the book and the fish, the spiral and the lock, but also this symbol for the fountain in front of the Opéra Épiclès, so we will be able to use it somehow. And we also got a glimpse of a Hydroculus locked inside an underwater building, protected by a puzzle, and another one here sitting on a canvas in the open. Talking about underwater exploration, we will also find places that are submerged but not flooded, so the entrances are protected by some kind of barrier. One of these places is this one here with a ruined crater sitting in the middle. We see some chairs, tables, bookshelves and something that looks like an astrolabe. Something interesting we heard in the livestream is that the first areas we will be able to dive are going to be shallow seas, and that the water wasn't originally there. These areas were submerged in the past. Lastly, but still very interesting, is that we won't be able to dive in every pool of water in Fontaine. The developer said that when diving is available, the stamina bar won't appear when we swim on the surface of the water, but it will appear in water areas where we can't dive. Now that we're done with the geography, let's briefly analyze the new plants and living beings of Fontaine. Underwater, we will meet different species of beings called Fontaine aberrants. Among them, some are specifically called xenochromatic Fontaine aberrants and are characterized by their light blue, almost translucent color like the hunter's ray. These specific Fontaine aberrants can be used to acquire different abilities that we will use underwater, both in combat and for puzzles. For example, the armored crabs will give us shields to parry and deflect enemies' attacks. Other normal but still enemy Fontaine aberrants develop body parts rich in elemental energy that they can only use on land. These beings are not aggressive, they won't attack us unless we provoke or scare them. Other very cute and friendly Fontaine aberrants are the leisurely otters, that will use shells to perform dances for us. I am extremely excited to see them because wolves and otters are my two favorite animals. The new boss, the Emperor of Fire and Iron, is the king of all Fontaine aberrants, and it lives somewhere in a cave. It seems to be looking for someone to spar with, and it's also very ancient since it witnessed the first Diluvian period. Lastly, other underwater creatures can be used to replenish our sprint bar, called aquatic stamina, and our HP, like these schools of fish. On land, we were shown 3 new animals. The gulls that are extremely curious, the umbrella finches that will perform concerts for us, and the Fontanian canines, so I guess these 2 extremely fashionable dogs are going to be all over the place. When it comes to the flora, we saw a few new collectible plants such as the Makot, the Lumidus bells, and the rainbow rose, but we also know about the Romaritime flowers from Fremene's first introduction. Now let's talk about something a little more complicated, the countless mecha we're gonna meet in Fontaine and the PneumaOusia energy system. The mecha are clockwork mechanical units used for a variety of purposes: patrolling and defense, underwater exploration, environment surveillance, and it's interesting that a Fatui skirmisher Geochanter Bracer is using it, and resource gathering. The mecha are powered by an energy form unique to Fontaine, called PneumaOusia energy, that was discovered and invented, once again, by Alain Guillotin. This energy is composed of 2 opposite kinds of energy: Ousia, represented with a dark blue, almost purple color, and Pneuma, represented with a golden color. Ousia and Pneuma remind me about the 2 elements that the people of the Primordial Unified Nation, so Enkanomiya, wrote about in the book Baptismal Bishop Experimental Records. These 2 elements were void and ether. And we could also think about quantum and imaginary from the Honkai multiverse because of the colors. Back to Fontaine, when these energy meet, they cause a reaction called annihilation reaction, and A produces energy. This reaction not only powers the mecha through repeaters by drawing Ousia and Pneuma energy from the environment, but it's also used to power some facilities, like this device that looks like an elevator. We can indeed see 2 rectangular blocks, 1 blue and 1 gold, on top of the device. Pneuma and Ousia can also be wielded by Fontainian vision holders. This innate ability is called Arcade, and it's recognizable by a different vision inlay depending on their type of Arcade. Ousia users have a Sora spiral on the top and bottom of their visions, while Pneuma users have something like a diamond shape or a triangle, and the direction of the fins on the sides of the visions are also mirrored. This innate ability can be used to solve puzzles, and in combat it can only be used against certain mecha to prevent them from using their special modes, by using the opposite arcade and as a consequence interfering with the mecha's power system. Talking about the mecha, they can only fully and freely function within Fontaine because of the repeaters, but it was also hinted that they can perform short and simple operations outside the nation thanks to pre-prepared energy blocks. We got to read a few names of these mecha, like the Assault Specialist, Suppression Specialist, Annihilation Specialist, Recon Log, and Arithmetic Enhancer. The mecha on this list all use Pneuma energy, and we were also shown a Suppression Specialist mech that indeed uses Pneuma, but we were also shown an Assault Specialist mech that instead uses Ousia. So I think that each mech, or at least the Garda mechs, will have both Pneuma models and Ousia models. Lastly, we got a glimpse at a fight against a mech, and we saw a strange symbol above and a red section on our HP bar. That seems to mean that the mech may have the ability to temporarily reduce our max HP. If you play Stariel and you fought Fentilia the Undying, you know how bothersome that is. Talking about the arcade, this word comes from ancient Greek philosophy and it's the first principle from which other principles are derived. In our case, the ancient Greek philosopher Thales of Miletus, who is also considered the father of philosophy, said that the arche from which everything was generated was water. According to him, water is the origin of all things because nature and everything nurtured by it is moist, but also because water is adaptable. Does that sound familiar by any chance? Thales' theory may also be the result of the traditional word image of Okeanos, the river source of all mortal and immortal life, and as a consequence he thought that the earth floated on water like a raft. The funniest thing in all of this is that Thales' arche was the topic of my first philosophy lesson on my first day of high school, and it managed to come back and be useful. We will have to temporarily skip the Indemnitium energy system because it's connected to the next chapter of the video, so let's talk about the characters. The first characters we'll meet will be Linny and Lynette. They are officially illusionists, who usually perform at Hotel de Boer, but in secret they're on a mission to uncover the secrets of Fontaine to prevent the inevitable crisis that's coming. Considering Linny's story quest is called The Forgotten Thief, we might deduce that he used to be indeed a thief, and in movies and anime, a thief that acts as a magician is very common. The main theory behind Linny and Lynette's true identity is that they are Fatui and they work under Arlecchino, since in the overture video she goes on stage and talks about being actors. Another proof that seems to sustain this theory is the fact that, unlike Linny and Fromene, Lynette has cat features, but they still say they're siblings. Arlecchino owns an orphanage in Snezhnaya, the House of the Hearth, and the kids grow up as families and eventually become Fatui agents, so that seems to be the case here as well. But what I would like to point out that goes slightly against this theory is the fact that only Fontainian natives display arcade types, and both Linny and Lynette can use the special abilities, which means that they too are Fontainian natives. Another strange thing about this theory is that, since their mission is to find a solution to the impending crisis, it would mean that the Fatui, or at least Arlecchino specifically, is trying to save Fontaine, which is also somewhat hinted at by Child appearing in the Opéra Épiclèse, now aware of how the justice system works and ready to fight. We know that Arlecchino has her own agenda and she would instantly leave the Fatui if she found a more convenient way to achieve her goals, so maybe she is secretly trying to save her nation? Moving on, there's Navia. She is the president of Spina di Rosula, which means thorn or little rose in Italian, although we don't really use the word rosula to talk about a small rose. Although rosula does exist in the Italian dictionary as an archaic word that can both mean little rose or a composition of leaves that look like a rose, this seems to be a common word in Corsica, an island in the Mediterranean Sea close to Italy and above Sardinia that belongs to France. In the past, Corsica belonged to Italy, but in 1769 was conquered by France. Up until 1859, the official language was Italian and now it's French, though they have a local language called Corsican or Corsu that is closely related to Tuscan, which would also explain the word rosula. By the way, Corsica is also very important because Napoleon was born in Ajaccio, the prefecture of Corsica, something like the capital basically. Now, since she's the president of something that sounds extremely Italian, I'm slightly angry because she does look like a mob boss who goes around with her minions, so this would be the second Italy Mafia association in Genshin Impact after the Fatui Harbingers. Anyway, Navia is a mihoyo character who wields a claymore. Her clothes are very unique and elegant and rose-themed. I wonder if she has anything to do with the anchor adorned with thorny roses in the sewers, since she has helm decorations on her clothes. We also got to see our old friend Charlotte that we met in version 3.7. We knew that she was a cryo user, but now we know that her arcade type is Pneuma. If you're wondering what's written on the board next to her, it says "Exclusive compilation of past top duelists, interview with the De Boer restaurant artists, Iridescence tour and the new trend of music." Next we have the Melusine. They come from the secluded village of Mersey on the Elina Island. They have powerful sight that can see things that humans can perceive, like traces of bad guys, which is the main reason why most employees of the Marechaussee Phantom are Melusine. This special sight ability is just making me believe harder that Wriothesley is actually blind and received some kind of special sight power from Zigavine, who's clearly a Melusine. Or that he actually uses elemental sight, like to read those papers with potentially elemental ink, and Zigavine acts as his eyes in his job, whatever it is. Anyway, the next character is Chlorinde. She's an mihoyo character and works as some sort of policewoman in Fontaine, and she's also the champion duelist, which is a special profession. She is someone Child wants to fight against, so we can imagine how strong she's gonna be, but she also has a complicated connection with him, and I'm actually really excited about it. We saw her fighting with Navia and the Traveler against the Gardamex, she follows Neuvillette and was present with Fossolor in Romaritime Harbor, so I would say that she belongs to the Marechaussee Phantom, the special detective force that reports directly to the Iudex, the Chief of Justice, Neuvillette. Now, Neuvillette is my main problem in this video, just so you know. He is the Iudex, which simply means judge in Latin, so he is the most important person in Fontaine after the Archon, although it really feels like he's more important than her. The thing is though that he doesn't have a vision. Mind you that I've watched every single scene in which he appears, frame by frame. It's not on his shoulders, his back, his front, legs, hair ribbon, not even on the cane. He does have 3 special features though. His pupils are white and almost diamond-shaped, so he's most likely not human but also not Khaenri'ah. On his clothes and cane there are the same droplet decoration that Furina has, but his are pink, dark blue and light blue, at least the one on his neck, and his hair is white and fades into dark blue. Now you obviously understood where I'm going with this, but Neuvillette is just one of the 3 pieces that composes my theory, so we'll have to talk about the Oratrice and the Indemnitium energy source first. Indemnitium is the second main energy source in Fontaine, and it powers most of the living and entertainment district facilities, the aquarelle system, lighting and daily needs, and it's generated by a peculiar mechanism. The Oratrice mécanique d'analyse cardinale, the device that actually delivers sentences in the Opéra Épiclèse, harvests people's belief in the justice system of Fontaine and converts it into energy. So Indemnitium is basically generated by judgment. If you think this sounds like the Akasha system, I fully agree. We actually saw the Oratrice in action in the trailer. The people, in this case Linny and Lynette, are brought to the Opéra Épiclèse to perform their piece, and if the Oratrice deems someone guilty, like Lynette once she entered the device filled with water, they are engulfed by its power and turned into water, just like the prophecy says is going to happen. The people will all be dissolved into the waters, leaving only the Archon on her throne to cry. Back to Indemnitium, the production process is very important because we also know that people have been experimenting and sometimes leaving Fontaine to look for an alternate energy system since the current one is about to fail. As a consequence, this means that people's belief in justice is decreasing and the Oratrice can't produce enough Indemnitium to sustain the nation anymore. Why don't the people believe in justice anymore? Well, if I had to guess, I'd say that it has something to do with the absurd, repressive and extreme legal system of Fontaine. Or maybe also because of how much of a brat Fossolor is. I mean, she doesn't really strike as the upholder of justice if she's more interested in the opera performance side of the trials. Like the developers said, trials display truth and illusions, drama and tragedy, and the Archon loves twists and turns. People may have lost faith in justice because the trials have indeed become pure entertainment rather than something serious and important, or they may have themselves become more interested in the performance rather than the justice that is being served, or they simply don't understand nor accept that trials are now a form of entertainment, like Navia told us at the beginning of the trailer. We also need to remember that most Oceanists, who were extremely faithful to the Hydro Archon, didn't accept Fossolor and left Fontaine, so a huge chunk of belief in justice is missing because of that. This reminds me of something Nahida told us back in version 3.2.
You may have heard that an Archon's power is derived from their people's faith.
Lastly, we also need to face the fact that justice is delivered by a peculiar machine with a consciousness, which takes me to my theory. In my last video, I said that Fossilor may have been created with a piece of the consciousness of the deceased original Hydro Archon. Her consciousness, as we found out in the Varukasha Oasis in The Girl of the Sands, is slumbering in the Gaukarena, a huge lotus-like flower inside the Harvest Totem, the tree that Rukadevata, the original Dendro Archon, created from the remains of the Hydro Archon, the Amrita Pool, to anchor her consciousness to the realm of the mortals, because she was corrupted by either forbidden knowledge or abyssal power, or both, after she died because of the Cataclysm. And although she was purified by Simurgh, a fraction of Nabu Malikata, the Lord of Flowers, Asili, that can negate the power of the Abyss, her consciousness was damaged so much that it couldn't go back to the cycle of death and rebirth anymore, so she couldn't enter the ley lines and go back to Irminsul. Now, I still think that Furina was born from the original Archon's corrupted consciousness, which would explain her childish behavior. Her heterochromia, on the other hand, most likely represents the Pneuma and Ousia energies, since they are native of Fontaine, and the Hydro Archon represents justice, which should be about balance. I think this could be potentially confirmed by René and Jacob's analysis of the Gaukarena in René's investigation notes. He wrote that the structure of the Gaukarena was similar to the structure of their bodies, so now I think they were talking about the arcade that, on the other hand, Mr. Carl, the other guy who accompanied them, who was most likely not from Fontaine, didn't have. Although I gotta say I'm still confused to why they didn't really need to eat. They did it only to keep up the act in front of Mr. Carl, and the only solution is that they were either Hydra Eidolons or Oceanids, but that's beside the point right now. What's most important is that René and Jacob found and brought back something from which, through a reflected refinement method, a will could be extracted in order to at least resist the impact, the unavoidable larger catastrophe that is threatening Fontaine. Well, there are 4 options here. They brought back a piece of the consciousness of the original Archon by secretly stealing a piece of the Gaukarena, extracted its will, created Furina, and placed a part of it inside the Oratrice. They brought back a piece of Azazite, which, with that reflected refinement method, became Archeum, the same material that caused the destruction of the Research Institute of Fontaine, and they extracted the will within and placed it inside the Oratrice. I don't really like this theory, also because it doesn't explain how Fossilor was born. They brought back a piece of the Black Fire that solidified in the Girl of the Sands into those grey stones. Black Fire was the consequence of the Abyss power freely leaking into that because of forbidden knowledge, so it's very possible that it has a will within. Either from the Abyss, specifically the sinner we encountered in Chapter 3, Act 6, Caribert, or from forbidden knowledge itself, since it's defined as a secret from beyond the heavens. The last option is the one I'm going for. René brought back both a piece of the Gaukarena to create Fossilor and of Black Fire to extract the will that is now inside the Oratrice. There is though a 5th option. It may be that the Oratrice has always hosted a will that was bestowed by and reacted in accordance with the original Hydro Archon, but after her death and with Fossilor's arrival, it may have forgotten its original purpose and is acting in accordance with Fossilor's preferences, that is, performance and entertainment. This also means that people may be judged unfairly and sentences may be served based on how bored Fossilor got during the performance. Now, why was Neviet the first piece of my theory, you might be asking? Well, doesn't he look like an Archon? Or better yet, doesn't he share common features and decoration with Fossilor, other than the sussiest fact that he doesn't have a vision just like the Archons? Would it really be too crazy to think that 2 separate entities were created from the same corrupted consciousness? They have opposite personalities, Furina is childish while Neviet is extremely serious, he can afford to literally shush the Archon without repercussions, and they both host the trials together. In this case, we would see something like ancient Inazuma, where 2 gods ruled over the nation. Makoto was thought to be the only god and Archon of the nation, while A was her Kagemusha, her body double that fought in her stead. In this case, the roles would be opposite. Furina is still thought to be the only god and Archon, but she only cares about the performance side of the trials, while Neviet is the one who is actually acting as the Archon should, and is delivering justice through the trials that the Oratrice decides. Although I gotta say this feels like a free god system if we consider that the Oratrice is the one that is actually delivering justice. Remember the name of the area where we will find the Opera Epiclese? Earlier we learned that it comes from the Erinies, who were three sisters, Alicto, Tisiphone and Meyera, so a free god system in Fontaine kinda fits here. My last theory for today has to do with Fontaine's elevation and the various floods. We learned from the livestream that Fontaine lies on unnaturally elevated plates, that most submerged places we will be able to explore were once land that was later flooded, and that the core of Fontaine was completely submerged and had to be rebuilt multiple times in the past. This was explained with a simple explanation: the rising sea level. Now, in our world, the sea level regularly increases and decreases because of the gravitational pull of the moon. As with all space objects with mass, the moon exerts a gravitational pull and, in this case, it affects the Earth. The oceans bulge out on both the closest and the farthest sides to the moon, causing high tides. Now, we learned from the livestream that there was a specific flood that was so intense that it was named the Grey Flood. I'm thinking, as I said before, that this happened when the original Hydro Archon died 500 years ago during the Cataclysm. Since the Hydro Archon rules over water, I think that her existence prevented Fontaine from being pulled away from the ground, but upon her death, the entire nation, which seems to be on a whole fault plane, lost the constant push toward the ground and was slowly pulled up. But why is that happening? Well, in my previous video I said that the last show of the Daia's 3-day reverie, called Sky Castle Saviors, was hinting at the fact that the Celestia floating island we see in the sky was losing altitude. As we all know, Celestia is somewhere above Fontaine and it's extremely big. What would happen if something so massive were to lose altitude, getting closer and closer to the ground? A gravitational pull, like the moon on the Earth. The only difference is that you can fit all the planets of the solar system between the Earth and the Moon, while Celestia is very close to the ground. As a consequence, if Fontaine lies on a fault plane, the entire nation would experience both a rising sea level and a rising fault plane. This, together with René's notion of an inevitable impact, gives me 4 important ideas. 1. Fontaine used to be at the same height as the rest of the nation of Tevat, but was pulled 300 meters up in the last 500 years. 2. My theory that Fossilor was created by humans makes even more sense now, because they needed someone who could use the water to push back against the gravitational pull just like the original Archon did, which would also explain why René and Jacob went to the Verukasha Oasis to find something with a will immediately after the original Archon died. 3. Celestia is slowly losing altitude, and as a consequence, 4. We will probably solve Celestia's altitude problem like we did in the show in the Valyria Mirage, and Fontaine will slowly go back to its original height. But we won't see it anytime soon, just like we won't see Dragonspine go back to its verdant landscape or the inevitable destruction of the Orchard of Paradisa. And that's it, I hope you liked the video. If you did, don't forget to leave a thumbs up, and if you're interested in Genshin Impact Theory videos, consider subscribing. Also, if you turn the notification bell on, you won't miss when I upload a new video. As always, I'll be waiting for you in the comment section to discuss everything about this video with you. Just know that I upload my videos at 1 AM, so if I suddenly stop replying, I might have simply gone to bed and I will reply after a few hours when I wake up. Although this was extremely long to write, record and edit, I do feel extremely satisfied. I haven't felt this satisfied with a video since the Archons one, which was probably one of the best videos I've ever done, but also one of the first ones. I guess my next video will come after Fontaine is released and after I played every available quest. In the meantime, I'll be playing Star Rail and Genshin Impact, but I might also start playing Honkai Impact 3rd on stream, so once Fontaine hits the usual quiet time before the next update, I might stream a little bit. Well then, thanks for watching and until next time, over and out.